Kia ora and welcome to another episode of the Niche Cast. This is your boy, the Diggity Doodah Doc, Mr. Papakai Panther, Mr. Slippers, here in my jandals, ready to rock out another episode of the Niche Cast with the Wobbly Wildcard. Kia ora to everyone around Aotearoa and anyone else who enjoys a bit of Aotearoa sport. We're here to discuss and cover Kiwi sport. Today we are going to absolutely chew the air off this Steven Adams trade. He's been traded from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the New Orleans Pelicans, so we are now Ngāti Pelicans. Last week we were Ngāti Thunder. This week we are Ngāti Pelicans in support of Steven Adams. We are also going to do a New Zealand seam bowling draft where we select 5 seamers each in the draft format, and we'll talk a bit about the Blackcaps upcoming cricket and whatever the fuck we want to talk about as well. You know the deal. If you enjoy the Niche Cache and the Niche Cast, the best way to support us is on Patreon. We just recorded our Patreon warm-up corridor where we took a quick little gaze at the New Zealand A game versus the West Indies, and that led to a couple of test match thoughts for that Blackcaps versus West Indies test series. We also deliver a email newsletter every Monday and Friday, so sign up to that because there's other little bits and bobs that fit into the email, and obviously we are always writing about Kiwi sport on the blog. Shout out to the blog, shout out to the podcast, shout out to you and all the Patreon whānau and all the whānau who support the Niche Cage. Big it up to you. Wobbly Wildcard, what is groovin' and movin'?
Don't know about moving, but definitely grooving is just like, I'm absolutely buzzed on football at the moment. I've watched all 4 men's premiership games in their entirety over the weekend. I watched Manchester United's game. I watched Burnley's game to see Chris Wood score the only goal in their first win of the season, so that was good for him. He'd gone 8 matches without a goal, so good to see the Woodsman back on the score sheet. At the same time, I was double screening, crossing over with Libby Kikache's game in Belgium, and Marko Stamenic made his debut and for FC Copenhagen in Denmark. I watched those 2 this morning as well. I watched Winston Reid go 120 minutes in the MLS playoffs. They won on penalties. I watched Michael Boxall win a little bit more comfortable in their playoff game. Those 2 will play each other in the next round, by the way. I watched Bill Tuiloma's team only the last 20 minutes maybe, and then extra time because I thought he was going to be subbed on and he wasn't. And then they blew a late lead because they didn't sub him on. I choose to believe that was a direct result. If they'd brought on Tuiloma, they would have closed it out for a 1-0 win. Instead, they drew 1-0, lost on penalties. So Portland Timbers get what they deserve, but I watched about half of that one. Still got to watch the 3 women's premiership games, which I'll do this afternoon and this evening, so I can have it written about tomorrow. Is there anything else in there? I think that might be it, but that's like this is over the course of maybe 72 hours, so I've probably spent more time watching football than I have doing anything else other than sleeping in that time, and it's getting to me. In a good way. In a good way.
Well, I've got a couple of questions that I want to ask you to just cover off a couple Kiwi sporting matters, and these questions might stretch you a bit from your little footballing cave, but there are some footballing questions here. So I want to know who the Wildcard has as his best goalkeeper, defender, midfielder, and striker from the local premiership that you have been up to your neck in. So that is the best goalie, the best defender, the best midfielder, and the best striker. We'll start with goalie Wildcard. Off the top of your head, who is the best goalkeeper in the premiership right now?
Are we going best performing through the first 2 weeks, or like the most talent?
Just whatever you think. Who is your best goalie?
Okay, well, I will say, oh, I don't know. That's a tricky one, actually. There's a few teams have got new goalkeepers. A few of it's I got to look at the teams. The thing so I don't forget anyone, but I'm leaning towards maybe like a Scott Basilay or something from Team Wellington, because he has been a good old pro for several years there with that team, and he was in the little as like a newsletter exclusive on Mondays. I've decided I'm gonna do a team of the week thing from the men's premiership, and he was the goalkeeper for this week. He saved a penalty. They won 2. Well, they scored from the rebound of his save from the penalty, but he still saved a penalty. A couple other big saves. So I'll go with Scott Basilay probably.
Scott Basilay, big shout out to him. What team does he play for again? Sorry,
Team Wellington.
Team Wellington. Your best defender, wildcard.
In terms of overall and like most talent and most potential type thing, I'd lean towards someone like Adam Mitchell, who I think was the best defender over last season, but he hasn't been quite at his peak in the first 2 weeks. Probably outperformed by his buddy there at Auckland City, Brian Kaltak, but yeah, probably lean towards Adam Mitchell, though I will throw a shout out the way of someone like Brock Messenger from Hamilton Wanderers, who's just been like they're so much fun to watch, because Hamilton, first of all, they're the only team who's kept 2 clean sheets to start the season, and they're so like, not in a niggly way, but they're real physical. Like, they're just the kind of guys who don't, like, none of those players in their backline are going to hesitate to jump into a 50-50 challenge, which means that they're usually going to win those. Very good in the air and whatever, and I think Brock Messenger is like the guy who represents that the best for that team. So, Adam Mitchell overall and Messenger through this season.
Best midfielder?
I would lean towards someone like Cam Howison there, I think. Again, not been at his best through this season, but just like one of the guys with the most pedigree in that competition, and also one of the guys who just like for a couple years now has consistently just been like a step above most else. He's got plenty of help there at Auckland City, but you'll go with Cameron Howison.
And who is the best man up top, the best striker in the Premiership in your mind after 2 rounds?
Yeah, that's probably another Auckland City fella in Emiliano Tade. It's not a coincidence that Auckland City are going to be represented very highly on this little rank, but I don't know, like someone like Garvin Coughlin, who's played and scored consistent goals for Southern in a team where you're just not getting as many chances, and now he's playing for Canterbury. Missed a couple good ones on the weekend, actually. Expect him to bounce back with a few goals from there. And like Stephen Hoyle is someone else who's a similar type, and even Hamish Watson. Like, there's a lot of good strikers. I'd say Tade is probably the pick of the crop, but there's definitely no shortage there. Even like Tommy Semi and Derek Taiku at Hamilton and bloody Eastern Suburbs. I said Stephen Hoyle, didn't I? That's one of the most fun. Even like watching bloody little like the Weenix fellas running around. Like, they've got a lot of attacking creativity and stuff going on there. Maybe they need that one dude to like score put everything away, or maybe that'll just be like Ben Old scored a double on the weekend or whatever. But it's one of those seasons, where like it's not always the case, but it does seem like every team knows where their goals are going to come from. So there is like nice competitive matches. We shouldn't get too many nil-all draws in this season. But yeah, it's a boring answer, but Emiliano Tade was probably your top forward.
Emiliano Tade. So there you go. That's the best players by position for the wildcard in the Premiership. Stretching your mind here, wildcard. So just do your best. Just roll with the punches, and just give me any names that come to the top of your head when I ask you for any player who has left the Melbourne Storm and either improved dramatically or taken their career to the next level after leaving the Storm. The only one I could think of is Cooper Cronk, who left the Storm to go to the Roosters and won premierships. So these are just questions that I've been pondering myself, as well as tapping into your expertise. I couldn't think of anyone who has left the Storm and like moved on. It's not necessarily a case of moving on to bigger and better things, because the Storm are always good, so it's pretty hard to find a bigger, better situation than the Storm, but just continued their career trajectory in a positive motion after leaving the Storm.
I'm struggling to think of anyone. Are we counting rugby players as well? You might find one or two who went to like rugby union and did some things, but that's a completely different landscape. You kind of can't compare that. So,
what? Even if that's included, I don't know anyone who has left the Storm and like, because someone like Marika Koroibete, he leaves the Storm to play rugby, and he plays for Australia, but that's not exactly like onwards and upwards, exactly. You know. Maybe you could make a case for Tohu Harris, but he had a couple rough years with the Warriors after leaving the Storm, and it's been a bit of a slower burn for Tohu Harris to find like what he can add to the NRL in 2020. So Tohu Harris is like a maybe, but that's all I could come up with.
Israel Folau, maybe? I don't know. He's gone on to bigger things. I don't know if he's gone on to better things though. He's gone on to a lot actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's the thing. Like, you leave the Storm, and it's like, well, the idea of moving on to a lot of things isn't necessarily better. Like, if you're moving on to a lot of different things, he was legit
the Wallabies' best player for a couple years though.
That is true. But he also played like AFL. He played a bunch of different things, kind of because he might not have been so good at a couple of those different things. But Israel Folau is another player that is in the mix, similar to Tohu Harris maybe. Like, he eventually got there because he was definitely the Wallabies' best player for a number of years, so he kind of got to that point, as Tohu Harris has got to that point at some stage as well.
The fact we had to think so hard about that, though, is kind of crazy. Like, this is the same. There's like almost like a little holy trinity about these types of situations that always come up whenever we talk about them. But be a little bit crazy for me not to mention the New England Patriots and the San Antonio Spurs as well, because it's the same thing there. Like, someone like Danny Green is still like, he just got traded briefly, was on the Thunder, and then they flipped him on to the 76ers, I think he ended up with, and like, he's won 3 championships. He's clearly a very good player. He can, hit 3-pointers. He can defend on the wing. He's the kind of veteran that you want if you're going to be chasing the championship. Also a dude who got heaps of criticism during the finals because he didn't play very well for the Lakers, and he wasn't the reason he won. I can think of him like draining 3-pointers in finals games for the Spurs back in the day. Like, I was just thinking about that as well. Like, he's won 3 championships with 3 different franchises. I think he's won 3. I don't think he was there for any of the other Spurs ones, but he might have won. Maybe he's won 4. I don't know. But I was thinking that normally when you hear that, it's someone like J.R. Smith has won them because he's followed LeBron around. But Danny Green's won more with Kawhi Leonard than he has with LeBron James. But like, similar situation there where players do really well in a team that has such a good system, and then they leave and outside of the system are still good. Like, Danny Green's a great veteran addition for the 76ers. Maybe never hit the same heights as he did earlier in his career. Definitely the case with the New England Patriots, where, with the possible exception of Tom Brady this season, but I mean, that is definitely an exception, because it's like, you're talking about a quarterback, and you're talking about a quarterback whose age has to be a factor as well when it comes to thinking about it. But like, all the wide receivers they get rid of,
that's the Cooper Cronk.
They all do much worse.
Tom Brady is Cooper Cronk.
There you go. Tom Brady is Cooper Cronk. That's actually works perfectly. Like, that's an exact fit to what we're talking about.
Well, just without the championships after.
Well, remains to be seen. But
remains to be seen.
I don't think he'll win anything with the Bucks, but he's competitive.
Just with the system idea, when you're talking about system in those other examples, I'm thinking Kevin Proctor, Adam Blair, those maybe Tim Glasby to some extent as well, who left the Storm to go to the Knights. Like, there's those players who are very good within the Storm system and just can't quite have the same effect at a different system. So system, shout out to system, systematic sporting shenanigans. We'll go there. Wildcard. The New Zealand Breakers and Wellington Phoenix are off to Australia, if they aren't in Australia already. And that means a bit of breaknicks. And they're in very similar positions with a very optimistic outlook for the upcoming seasons. And I want to know from you who is going to finish higher on their respective ladders between the Breakers and the Wellington Phoenix.
Oh man, it should be the Breakers. Like the Phoenix are in a situation where at least they've got enough continuity to where they should be able to pick up where they left off last time, but top four, like repeating in the top four would be an outstanding result for them, whereas for the Breakers, they are going to have a roster that should finish in the top two. Like, I'm not necessarily saying minor premiers, but if they finish below second, like they don't get home advantage, if indeed even home advantage is a concept that exists when they get around to the semi-finals, but hypothetically speaking, if they don't, I would be I don't know about disappointed. That's the thing with the Breakers, is that you just can't really put a lot of, not logic, but just, it's just hard to keep up with what's going on there. And I think that's maybe a good thing that they haven't been in the news for too many reasons other than their own little, like their charity thing that they're doing, the charity basketball game, whatever, that like in recent times, because you remember how bad last off season was, and just that bled into the first half of the season, which was, I mean, the most chaotic I've ever seen from a professional New Zealand sports team. Like, I can't think of the sheer number of different dramas that popped up was insane. And a lot of it was self-inflicted too, just like being too hasty with building the team and various things. And, you know, there was no excuse for signing Glenn Rice in the first place. And then the fact that backfired, it's like, oh, what do you know? Like, I can't think of a metaphor. I had an idea in my head for a metaphor there, and I lost it getting around to the point. But you know, there's the sheer chaos of that. And then the weird thing is, once they started trimming it, it's not weird actually. It makes perfect sense when you think about it. When they started trimming back a lot of those things, they suddenly got really good in the second half of the season. So the idea that they can pick up from that momentum, and then having made a couple very good signings, Ty Webster and Lamar Patterson's just a straight replacement for Scotty Hobson, but you know, they've signed some good Kiwi fellas, even someone like right at the end of the roster, someone like Tane Murray, if he's able to hang around long enough before he's got to go to college in the States. Like, just even the fact he signed at all is a nice little indication that the team's sorting things out. So like, all that considered, the Breakers for sure should be a team that's contending for a championship. The Phoenix are a team that would hope to, if a few things click. Like, they're still got to know that first of all, they got to get a couple import signings that can raise their standard back up to the guys they had last year in those roles, or better in terms of whoever they signed to play striker. Someone's got to score a lot of goals, because, well, it's not that Gary Hooper didn't score goals, it's that he was only fit enough to play half a season, basically, and they don't want, like, the old cliche, but the best ability is availability. So there's a few more question marks about the Phoenix than there are about the Breakers, but there is one big question mark about the Breakers, which is whether the back half of last season is true, like a true reflection of where they're heading, and that the first half, although drama, was just like, review window, it's gone, like, don't worry about it, or whether that's, I don't know, but that's the trick with the Breakers, is they just got to hope that the trends they were on at the end of the season are legit and they can pick up where they left off, and if they do, then that's a title contending team.
Beauty. Is there, like, we don't need to get into a investigation around the Breakers, but I've just seen these ads for their celebrity game. Like, it's a cool idea, like, get a bit of buzz, all good, that's no worries. The first name of the players mentioned is Finn Delaney. Is he the Breakers, like, star player? Because it's just, when it's, the way the ad is, like, produced, there's some bits and bobs, and then it gets into, like, the players who are going to be playing, and Finn Delaney is, like, he's first, and there's also, like, a good 5 to 10 seconds just on Finn Delaney. So, as a consumer, I'm thinking, holy shit, Finn Delaney, fuck, he's the man. Have you seen that? Do you have any, like, quick little tidbits on that?
Well, I mean, he's not the star player. He'd be probably starting, but he'd be looking at, like, 4th or 5th option in terms of who's getting the shots. Like Corey Webster, Lamar Patterson, etc. Ty Webster are all going to be ahead of him on that chart. But maybe Finn Delaney, I mean, he was injured for a lot of last season, so they didn't get the big breakout year that they were hoping for him, and that I think a lot of people were almost expecting of him. So maybe that's a little bit of it, is like the hype is also thinking that because he's primed to have a very strong season, maybe you put him a little bit more front and center. I think also he's accessible because he's a fairly nice, humble dude who's not going to say anything dramatic in public or whatever, and therefore can, I don't know, he's available for media, therefore he gets that kind of prominence.
Shout out to Finn Delaney. I have a couple questions that you don't necessarily need to know the answer. They're designed for me to spin a yarn, but I'll get your thoughts on this matter. What speed of bowling in women's cricket is the equivalent to 145 to 150 kilometers per hour in men's cricket?
This is something I've thought about before, and I think it seems to me like 150 plus is about 130. So the 140, 145 kind of mark, which is the more consistent mark, like the fastest bowler in the world, those guys aren't hitting 150 every delivery. Well, maybe a couple of them might be, but whatever. So that sort of more consistent, controlled, but still extremely fast thing. Probably, I don't know, probably 125.
That's close. There aren't, just based on all the women's Big Bash League that I've followed and I watched so far this summer, the 125 is a bit of a stretch. Like there's a couple bowlers who are pushing 120 and maybe 121, 122. No one's bowling faster than 125. So like the way I framed it in my mind was that 120 is 145. However, this makes no sense at all. It's just an idea in my head. Like the gap between 120 and 130 in women's cricket is far greater than the gap between 145 and 150 in men's cricket. So you can't just say that 150 is 130 and 145 is 125. That doesn't really apply to me. It's like, okay, if you're bowling 125, you're pushing the 150 equivalent in men's cricket. There are a couple bowlers in the women's game who are touching 120 Ks. Leah Tahuhu is someone from New Zealand who can get up around 118, 119. And there are a couple bowlers, Catherine Brunt from England, Ishmael from South Africa. They're hovering around the 120 mark. And then Australia has like a couple younger girls who are pushing 120 as well. So to me, this is a really important point because I consume just as much women's cricket as I do men's cricket, and in trying to inform sports fans and cricket fans, the women's game is completely different. So you can't view it through the same lens as men's cricket, and the speed of the seam bowlers is a great example. Because if you have someone bowling 120 Ks in the Women's Big Bash League, that's hostile. But it doesn't look hostile. But you have to view it through the women's lens, and I think it's a really interesting confirmation that I've received, is that 120 Ks in women's cricket right now, that's bloody fast. And that just helps you understand the women's game a bit more as well.
Yeah, it's just a matter of having that context, which is very, very important.
And that's the stuff you got to figure out. Like you have to, the context. Like I think I've done the work to understand the context to help lay it out, and it's something that you can't automatically see fairly easy. I'm not sure how many Kiwi bowlers in the domestic competition are touching 115, 120 Ks, but I do have a question here for you, Wildcard, based on the Halliburton-Johnston Shield, which is the women's one-day competition. 5 bowlers have taken 4 wickets across the first 2 games because they play on the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. So there were 2 games last weekend. 5 bowlers took 4 or more wickets, Wildcard, and I want to ask you, how many of those bowlers are under the age of 25?
Ooh, interesting. Yeah. If it's anything like the Plunkett Shield trends at the moment, I'd say, would you say of the top 5, I'd say 4 of them.
4, bang on. You've got Emma Black. She is 19 years old from Otago. Sarah Asmussen, she is 20 from Canterbury. She bowls a bit of leggies. Claudia Green, she's 22 years old with Central Districts. And Monique Reese is 20 years old from Wellington. The only player who is over 25 years old is Charlotte Sarsfield, who I believe is 27. And she is from Northern Districts. So that's pretty cool to see. Plenty of young talent in the Women's Big Bash League for New Zealand as well, because we've got Amelia Kerr and Maddie Green from the Brisbane Heat. They are in the semi-finals. Sophie Devine is also in the semi-finals, which is today or tomorrow. And then we've got up-and-coming talent in the Halliburton-Johnston Shield as well. 2 more questions here for you, Wildcard. Who is your male and female pick of the Flying Kiwis this week?
This week? Well, the stuff I've focused the most on in the writing about it is the MLS. But Chris Wood's made a late play with a very important goal for Burnley. I think maybe the most significant though, as nice as it is to see Winston Reid playing 120 minutes in the playoff game, and almost scoring a goal too. Like, it looked like he had scored it. The TV said he had scored it at first. He was just sort of like following up at the far post, barely got a sprig on it at all. In the end, they decided the ball was already going in and he didn't touch it enough to divert it in any way, so they credited it to the other dude. So, it was nice while it lasted, but because he didn't get the goal, I think the most significant one is probably Marko Stamenic's debut for FC Copenhagen, who, like, a year ago was playing for Team Wellington, Ole Academy fella, playing Central League even not that long ago. He went for a trial with Copenhagen in March, did pretty well there, and I think they were pretty keen to sign him, but he couldn't stay on because that was when the lockdowns happened. So he came back to New Zealand, went back over in September, signed on there, played for their under-19s team at first, scored a goal for them in the cup final, played this morning in his first team appearance, and looks real tidy, like just a solid midfielder. At 18 years old, he's already big enough to hold his own there. He had a nice touch. He moved the ball around, didn't try to do anything too much with it, just made sure it kept moving. More than anything, he was a big defensive shield, which is an aspect of his game I'm not sure I haven't seen a huge amount of him, but from what I have seen, that aspect was more prominent for Copenhagen than it has been in other times I've seen him. Where he was just a big physical presence, getting in lots. I mean, he committed more fouls in that game than anyone else on the field. And he got subbed off with 20 minutes to go because he was on a yellow card and they were chasing the game. They ended up losing 2-1. But yeah, that's probably the most significant because he's like clearly such a talent, and that was his big break probably in professional football. For the females, I would say maybe a more stock standard answer like if we did this every week, she would probably be there 4 of the last 5 times or something. Someone who's always going to be up there is Rhea Percival. Scored against Arsenal in the Continental Cup group stages. they ended up drawing 2-2. Hers was the equaliser to make it 1-1, and then they conceded again, and then they scored real late on, about like 2 minutes to go, and Percival had another chance with the shot that went just wide, and they ended up. The way this tournament goes is a little bit weird. Like in the group stages, you share a point for the draw. Each team gets 1 point, but then they offer a second point if you go to a penalty shootout. And Spurs lost the penalty shootout, so Arsenal got the bonus point there. But still, Rhea Percival's played, I think, 30. I worked this out. I think she's played 37 Women's Super League games in England for West Ham, and then now she's in her second season with Spurs. And she's never scored a goal in the league. However, she's scored 2 goals in her last 3 Continental Cup games. So for whatever reason, she's not a cup specialist, because she still does excellently for Tottenham in the league stuff. Just for whatever reason, seems to pop up with goals when the cup games come around, and that was a big one too, because that's Tottenham versus Arsenal. That's your North London derby there. So. Getting amongst the goals at a very important time and just continuing on. She's been playing really well for Spurs. She's like, again, similar to what I was saying about Marko Stamenic. Like, she's one of the most disruptive players and like midfielders in that competition. She's right up there in interceptions and tackles won, those kind of stats. So, and this is week in, week out. And there are a lot of Kiwi footballers playing in the top couple divisions in England in the women's stuff. There's no one who plays anywhere near as consistently or at consistently high level as Rhea Percival, who I believe is far and away now at this point the record holder for the most Women's Super League appearances by a New Zealander, and she just bloody, like, week in, week out, one of the most consistent performers of all the Flying Kiwis.
Big cheers to Rhea Percival. Finally, wildcard. Joseph Parker versus Junior Fa is cursed, or it is destined for greatness.
Somewhere in between. I don't know. Like, I've been a little bit surprised because it's on in like 2.5 weeks or something, isn't it? I'm surprised
Well, it just got postponed.
Oh, did it? Okay. Well, then I guess it's cursed. I didn't even know that it had been postponed.
I think Junior Fa had some issue with a blood test.
Oh, well, that's no good.
I'll just pull up some more information on that one. Yeah, that was on the 20th, so 4 days ago. Junior Fa had to pull out. It's been postponed or rescheduled. Junior Fa has to have a routine surgery by the sounds of it. He had some issues. However, so that's the question. Is it cursed or is it destined for greatness? I would advise you to check in with what Eugene Behrman said in a recent press conference. He absolutely unloaded on David Higgins and Juco.
Really?
Like, for me, as a City Kickboxing fanboy, I'm all aboard the bandwagon, the Kiwi UFC bandwagon, the Junior Fa bandwagon. That's all me. So to hear what Eugene Behrman said, or to read what he said, just made me absolutely happy as Larry. So shout out to Eugene Behrman. I know he's a very slick and smart operator. But yeah, the question, it is cursed or is destined for greatness at a later date?
Yeah, well, the point I was sort of going to say, having like been so deep in my football rabbit hole over the last couple of days, I didn't even hear about that at first, is that I had been surprised over the previous couple of weeks how little, not that there wasn't media coverage, but just that it wasn't cutting through. Like, even, well, I mean, and I guess that fits into it as well, because that should be massive news, and maybe it was, and I've just been not paying attention because I've been very, very focused on football and absolutely nothing else for about 3 days. And one more day after, because I've got to get to all the Women's Premiership games as well. But I guess that kind of just adds on to that feeling I was already having, is that this just doesn't seem to be cutting through the fog in a way that I thought it was going to, as a big, all Kiwi heavyweight clash. And so it probably adds a little bit more fuel to the old cursed fire. The accursed fire, I don't know, but that's not a great look. I tell you what, though, I'm definitely checking out that press conference the first chance I get. I don't hate David Higgins or anything. I think he's quite an interesting character, and I certainly think he's gone up in my estimations a lot since he split the JUCO thing with Dean Lonergan. Since those two went separate ways, I think it's maybe not a good reflection on Dean Lonergan, but I think Higgins sort of, his act got a little cleaner and more focused after that. Less of the sort of celebrity fight for life type gimmicks and whatever. But he is definitely a bit of a cowboy. And I think there's method to his madness, but if Eugene Behrman, who is someone who is very disciplined and probably doesn't have a lot of time for fools, if he's got, I would scoop up some popcorn and see if I can find a YouTube of that press conference, because I would love to hear every single word he said on that. Not just hearing it, but seeing the like the facial expressions and the gestures and everything like that, just the whole package.
And having been like covered this beat for a year or two, this is nothing new, because there is also a video on YouTube via Combat TV where Eugene Behrman absolutely tears Kevin Barry to shreds as well. So,
yeah, well, I think that's maybe more of a, not an open goal, but you win a penalty, you step up, you got a free shot sort of thing. I think Kevin Barry is more vulnerable to that criticism even than Higgins, even though Higgins gets himself out in front. Because there is a fair point to say that Joseph Parker has not had the best, not preparation, but like tactics and stuff in some of his fights. The Dillian White one is the best example. It's a very clear thing to say that he's not been at his best in some of his biggest fights, and that falls back on your trainer, and I think Kevin Barry has to cop some of that.
Well, yeah, that's a very shrewd insight from yourself, but that's not what Behrman's referring to. He basically just says that Kevin Barry should be very careful re-entering New Zealand. But that was like from a couple of years ago. So that was a couple of years ago, so I'm not surprised that Eugene Behrman said what he said. Specifically, I think more with David Higgins in the press conference that you wildcard will soon watch. Well, that's all of the questions. I think we covered off a bunch of interesting
Could
things.
I throw one back at you?
Yeah, sure, mate. Hit me.
What was your, like, we don't need to go into this in any sort of depth or whatever, but what was your initial feeling when RJ Hampton got drafted at number 24? Like, was that he didn't look too happy himself. I think he was just confused because he didn't know which hat to put on. But, like, because we talked about this a little bit in previous podcasts and whatever, what was your feeling when he went, like, I think it's fair to say, that low down in the draft?
To be honest, my feeling was a complete melancholy, because by that stage of the draft, I was checked out of the draft and wasn't really in a whole lot of care. So when I did see that RJ Hampton, I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. What were you feeling?
I, at that point, was like, because I had to go out briefly for like 15 minutes, and that was around the time of the, like, just after the Thunder picked at 17, having traded for that pick. And I thought he would be gone by the time I got back, because my feeling all along was that he was someone who would probably go around the like 18, 17, like 16 to 18 probably mark. And I fluctuated a little bit on that. Well, at first I didn't know what to think, because they told us he was going to be this top 5, top 10 pick when he first came to the Breakers. Having watched him play for the Breakers, I fell back another 10 spots on that because I just didn't see it. I didn't see his fit in the modern NBA unless he could learn to shoot properly. When by the time he actually got picked, I was just confused, because I was trying to figure. First of all, I thought the Bucks were picking at that thing, and so did everyone. And then I think Denver traded into that pick, which belonged to someone else in the first place. I can't remember. I think New Orleans had picked up the pick from the Bucks. And it was in the Drew Holiday trade, which later became the Steven Adams trade, when they sort of incorporated that into that. That pick went to New Orleans, who then sent it on to Denver. And at that stage, I'm confused because I'm trying to figure out what's going on and which team he's going to play for. By the time that was all going on like the previous few picks, I was quite pessimistic because I was looking at these teams and being like, I don't see a fit here unless they want to take him on as a project player. And I think that's what happened with the Denver Nuggets, is that they have picked him up as a project player. It's also a good fit for him because I think in a way that's kind of the like long-term best situation for him to be in, is in a situation where he's not going to be asked to come and play 30 minutes as a rookie. He's going to get 10 minutes maybe, but he's going to get a lot of development off the court, which he probably needs because that's stuff he missed out on not going to college. Like, say what you want about the NCAA system, but they do actually have coaches whose job it is to progress players and ready them for the draft. And he missed out on that, playing with grown-ass men and like full professionals. And maybe he needed that more than someone like old LaMelo Ball, for example. So I think he's in a good situation as far as his career goes. I think overall he's in a place where he can become the best player down the line. And I don't think he was ready to be one of the a higher pick, but just the way he fell from what we were told to expect confused me a lot. Like, I didn't quite know what to think. I was just sort of staring at the TV trying to figure out, because after a certain point, it's not about picking the best player available because everybody is sort of a level. You get like through the top tier guys and then maybe you get a few flyers below that. Once you get after like 15, it's players who teams have specifically targeted because they want, like that dude that the Thunder drafted. No one else wanted him, not because he isn't good, because he's an 18-year-old who can, who's like 7 foot tall and he has like the skills of a guard, but he's not physically ready because he's so young. He's the youngest guy picked in the first round, I think. He's probably 2 years away. The Thunder are the only team who are on a schedule to where they don't need to be good for 2 years because they're right at the start of a rebuild. So they targeted this guy specifically, got him as low as they thought they could get him, pulled the trigger on a trade. It's all about fit at that point, and I wasn't sure if any of those teams around that area would have specifically targeted RJ Hampton up until a point where like his talent becomes too much to ignore. Like, he wasn't going to drop into the second round just because of the potential for if he does tidy up some of those other aspects of his game. But yeah, I was just sitting there trying to figure out, would this team need him? No, that I don't see why they would. Or what about this? No, I don't. Oh, he might slide further. And then when he finally did get picked, it was almost a surprise that he did get picked because I'd got so used to seeing reasons why he wouldn't, it was all very confusing, but I think that's kind of the nature of the draft. But yeah, it's a strange one because I think he's ended up in a really good place. And they're a team, like the Denver are a team who have a good reputation for developing players as well. But it was very different to what we were told the guy would be when he first signed with the Breakers, when he left the Breakers, all the publicity stuff about him. I think he must have his agents. I think he changed agents since he left the Breakers, and clearly, like, you know how agents have certain friends in the media industry and they'll get someone to tweet, I tell you what, this guy might be a sleeper pick to go in the lottery, you know, those kind of little, there was buzz about him, but none of it came true on draft day, you know what I mean? That's where I got confused the most, is the difference between feeling like he's in a great place, but also feeling like everything we were told about this whole situation was not true.
That the insight about who RJ Hampton was sold to be coming to the Breakers, what like his projections were having left the Breakers, and how that all panned out, that is the insight that I think is the most interesting bit. And to me, that is really important because it's obviously drawing a link to the Breakers and Aotearoa and stuff like that, but it's also important because the draft is like just, I don't know what it was. I've heard some things about like just various stat pieces and stuff like that about just how many players who are drafted don't actually get anywhere. So the value of certain picks is reasonably nothing because very few draft picks actually end up with like long-standing NBA careers. But maybe like a bit of the pandemic vibe and just how the hype around the draft, but fuck, the draft just kind of means nothing. So specifically with RJ Hampton, the connection to the breakers and the insight that you offered there was really important, and it was interesting. Obviously, there's a bit of interest around LaMelo Ball as well. But to segue into some Steven Adams chat, no one is thinking about the draft right now. Because as soon as the draft finished, then NBA free agency opens up and all the trades come. Usually it doesn't play out like that. Like in the normal season, you don't have the build up to the draft, which I think whipped up the frenzy around the draft and the hype for the draft. Obviously, we've got our little specific bit of intrigue with RJ Hampton and LaMelo Ball as well. But there was like I found myself a little bit excited for the draft. Leading into, what was it, last Thursday. I was a little bit excited. And as soon as the draft started, all my feelings of excitement just like vanished, and then the draft finishes, and then suddenly you realize what is actually important. And what is important in the NBA is free agency and trades and stuff like that. So it was kind of a weird journey for myself, because I was just, maybe it was just like how different things have shaped my sport interest this year, and just consuming different bits of media and stuff like that. But there was certainly a level of hype around the draft that you soon realize that the draft is really not that important. Like, it is important if you can pick up a franchise-altering player, as we'll get to with a bit of Zion Adams, with the Steven Adams link there as well. But unless you're getting that player, like, no one's talking about like how this player could help this team and the fit and the system and all that stuff that we always talk about here on the Niche Cast. You get a lot more of the American style of shit, where it's like far less team orientated and more built, like far more discussion about the skills of the player. They're too small. Oh my gosh, this player's 22 years old. He's too old to be drafted. We need to draft an 18-year-old, and all that shit that just Americans love. No one really wants to talk about team building, development, and integrating players into your system. And that's what you've just said about RJ Hampton. He's in a nice little place where maybe that's more of a focus, as opposed to getting RJ Hampton on the court right now, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of had this moment with this ongoing journey where I was like, fuck the draft. Like, this is all pretty dumb. It's cool to see players get drafted and stuff like that, but when you're thinking about the actual NBA, and maybe this is how because part of this is my consumption of sports media, inspiration, getting different angles, different thought patterns and stuff like that, different ways to discuss sport. And the NBA is my go-to option for, it's not necessarily inspiration, but just trying to improve, trying to get better in the sporting context. And I'm getting to the Steven Adams bit, just hold on. It was really interesting to see the different perspectives on the journalists, the reporters who are coming at it from it's not the draft angle, but like, the Mike Schmitz, the Giavoni type of dudes who are focused on players entering the draft. So they're looking around the world for the best prospects, keeping tabs on players in college. Like, they'll do a big feature on LaMelo Ball down in Australia. They'll do a big feature on RJ Hampton down in New Zealand. Who's the best dude coming out of Europe? We're watching this Europe versus USA rest of the world game. These are the best players, blah, blah, blah. There was a very different perspective between those dudes and then the dudes who come at it from an NBA perspective. And they're like analyzing the draft from a strictly NBA perspective. So the way I'm envisioning this in my head is you've got like the draft, which is just a point, a moment, and then you've got people who are talking about all the stuff to get to the draft, and then you've got people kind of talking about all the stuff after the draft from an NBA perspective, and then below the draft you've got the prospect perspective. And I found that really interesting, how different those perspectives are. Like, that is my, if I am to provide a key takeaway from the draft, and maybe this is like subconsciously what I was kind of focused in on, because I did recognize this as an interesting point. So I think that led me into more of a paying attention to the draft and just hearing how different, the different perspectives on different players, with one that is like far more irrelevant than the other, because all that matters is what you're going to do in the NBA. All that matters is your skill set in the NBA context. Whereas, like, what you did X year ago and your analyzing your different skill sets outside of an NBA context just isn't as relevant. So I just kind of found that interesting. I'm not sure if you got any little bit on that, Wildcat.
Oh, I can do heaps on that. I mean, it's a straight up industry, the way that draft coverage happens, like the whole leading up to. There's people who at ESPN, for example, whose full-time job, like you mentioned that Javoni dude, like full-time job is to look at prospects, scout them heaps, tell you exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are and skills and what all these things, what fit they have, what players they remind folks of. And it gets weird when you get into like people analyzing people's personalities and whatever and those kind of things. I mean, they're all doing personality tests and whatever for the clubs, for the franchises' benefits before going into a draft like that. But I mean, one of the factors we talked about leading up to this was how this was that industry is like clockwork. It's this whole thing, but there was no NCAA tournament this year, and the draft was like 3 months later than it should have been. So there's all this extra time, for example, of RJ Hampton working out like mad with what's his name, Miller, who used to play for the Heat. Like getting extra, like the player he was by the time the draft came around was not necessarily the player that was scouted at the start of the year when he was playing for the Breakers. And I've heard the point made that RJ Hampton just got over-scouted. I don't, there's a fine line between over-scouted and under-scouted because they're often the same thing. If you say, like, if people were saying the exact same thing about someone way too often, but with no adaptability to see that these are young players who are going to grow not only as players but as people as well, then that becomes, that level of over-scouting becomes under-scouting because you're not flexible in acknowledging those, the evolution or whatever. And yeah, I don't know if that's the case with RJ Hampton or not, but I do think that like LaMelo Ball there was chat that he could drop down to like 5 or 6 or whatever, or there people had question marks over this or that. I mean, I never got the impression that he would go anywhere lower than 3. It was just a matter of where. And I thought probably from, I'm not someone who pays very much attention at all, but from the little amount that I had looked into, which is more than most years, just because of the context of LaMelo Ball, I thought he was probably the best player. And the reason he didn't go higher wasn't because he's crap or like overrated or any of those things. The reason he didn't go higher is because Minnesota had the first pick and they were planning on trading for Ricky Rubio because he's a point guard who has familiarity with Karl Anthony Towns. They have already D'Angelo Russell, who's probably not a point guard, but is at least going to be playing in the guard positions. There's not really room for it. Like, that just was a better fit for them to take that other, what's his name, Edwards fella, Anthony Edwards. Then when it comes to the Golden State Warriors, well, they have a point guard called Steph Curry who's rather good, so picking James Wiseman just made more sense for them in terms of fit, and therefore LaMelo drops to 3. So I don't think it's anything necessarily against him that he went 3rd, and I think he's in a very good situation again. Like, Charlotte needed him more than they needed the other guys, because LaMelo will at least bring them a little bit of star power and some relevance that a franchise like the Hornets hasn't had for a little while, despite the fact that Michael Jordan owns the place, which is mental to think about, that he could like have been one of the most famous humans on the planet while he was playing, and probably still, like the idea of Michael Jordan, the basketballer, probably still is one of the most famous people on the planet. But as an owner, he could be as boring and irrelevant as he is. It's a little bit mental to think about, but I don't think LaMelo Ball, again, like, he's in a very good position. I don't think he dropped through any fault of his own. However, he did go third when people were saying he might go first. And RJ Hampton definitely went probably 5-6 places below predicted. And that itself was about 10-15 places below what we were initially told he might go at when he first signed with the Breakers. So it's undeniable to say that the two big next stars out of the NBL got drafted lower than they were hoping to. And I don't think you can take out the context of them having played overseas as being a reasoning for that. Like, it's very obvious when you, like, there's that Israeli guy, Denny Advija, so however you say that, who went to I think he went to Washington at about 9, and he was the one dude who, looking at the prospects and little like mock drafts and whatever to get to know the idea of it, so I could have an idea where RJ Hampton might go. This Israeli dude, 19-year-old, I think he's a small forward. This is the dude who I got like the most excited about, is thinking, whoa, I like the sounds of this guy, and then watching some highlights, I like the look of this guy too. Drops all the way to 9, and it's just yet another example of the NBA draft undervaluing players coming out of Europe and overseas. And it happens every year. Like, Luka Doncic should never have gone lower than 1. He was so clearly the best prospect in that. In fact, I'm pretty sure I wrote about it before that draft. And this worked out as well as any draft for a team I've ever supported has gone, because he went to the Dallas Mavericks, to the team I support, which is perfect. Right at the time where Dirk Nowitzki was retiring. I think they overlapped one season. Like, it was perfect. Like, passing the torch along. But clearly underrated from just for no reason at all. Like, everything that RJ Hampton said about going to play against grown men for his development, Luka Doncic had been doing that since he was 16. Like, he was so clearly the best player in that draft. And where it got undervalued, and then you're looking at this Israeli fella getting undervalued, and every year, like, you look at the best players in the NBA who went outside the lottery, like, of current guys. It's guys like Giannis Antetokounmpo, who got drafted below Steven Adams. So it's like Rudy Gobert and what's his name, big fella Jokic from the Nuggets, RJ's mate. Like, these are for all the oversaturation of this is the point I'm coming around to. For all the oversaturation of like the draft coverage, there's still these massive like gaps of how do you get this wrong every single year? And it's hard not to think that like there's a lot of positive reasons why a guy like whoever the next RJ Hampton might be would want to come and play in the Australian Professional League. Like, there's lots of reasons why that would be good. Personal development and just the experience of it and all these things, living in a great country and like many reasons, but getting yourself a better draft pick is not one of them. And I think we saw pretty clear evidence of that. It's going to take several years at least before that, just whatever the mental block is in the NBA, before that comes around to where guys like LaMelo Ball and RJ Hampton are having their draft stocks improved by playing overseas, rather than what we saw here, which is that they were probably damaged. Certainly Hampton's. LaMelo, like I said, probably was just a victim of the draft lottery and the order of it more than anything. But yeah, I don't think that getting drafted nice and high is something that the NBL can offer to future prospects.
I think getting drafted nice and high is irrelevant. Like, it doesn't matter where you're drafted.
Not for the bank balance, but yeah, clearly not for. I mean, the reigning 2-time MVP went 15th, so yeah, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, that's kind of the point I was getting to about like my melancholy with the draft, is that there's all this focus on where players are drafted and they fall and all that stuff, and I just lean more towards like, it doesn't matter, like what number you are drafted. There might be some contractual benefits, but like for someone like RJ Hampton, he like, it's just, you got I don't want to get too spiritual with it, but you just gotta, you're drafted where you're meant to be drafted. Like, what number, whether it's 10, 13 or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It matters on a superficial level if we're thinking about like how it looks for the Breakers, but what is more telling is again, to go full circle, is what you do in the NBA. So it doesn't matter where RJ Hampton was drafted as a reflection on the Breakers. What matters, if we're viewing it through that lens, which is the same lens that you view these prospects through anyway, is like, what are you doing in the NBA? So who gives a fuck about the draft? Because
the money that you lose on your first contract as well, on your rookie scale contract, RJ Hampton went 10 places higher, he'd probably get $2 million more. But if he went 10 places higher to a team where they were bad, he was bad, didn't develop, suddenly he's out of the league in 5 years, versus if he goes and earns himself like a $15 million a year contract on his next contract, like that's where the money comes from. It's your first big contract after the rookie stuff. So yeah, like even that one big advantage of being drafted higher up doesn't actually matter if you end up in a bad fit for yourself as a player on the team you end up with. Like, it's the next contract where you make your money. That's where you get the stuff you can retire on.
Alright, that's way too much on the draft, because we've got something even better. Like, Steven Adams is playing for the New Orleans Pelicans, and the deal that led him to the Pelicans was an almighty kerfuffle. We don't need to talk about the deal at all. It did involve RJ Hampton, but it was a fucking shitstorm of a deal, various trades and all that shit, wild card. But all that matters is Steven Adams is on the Pelicans. This isn't the time or place to reflect on Steven Adams as an Oklahoma City Thunder player. Like, for the past 7 to 8 years, we have followed Steven Adams extremely closely. We love Steven Adams as an Oklahoma City Thunder player. We love the Thunder as the whānau that Steven Adams fell into, and through that we love the organization. We love just the whole relationship between Steven Adams and Oklahoma City Thunder that has been kind of documented throughout our existence as the Niche Case over the past few years. So let's get in, because this is just as an exciting situation as we've experienced with throughout the years of Steven Adams at the Thunder. Now Steven Adams is part of another smart organization. David Griffin does a lot of great work in building the roster with the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, Steven Adams is going to be playing alongside Zion Williamson, so there's that aspect of two very slick big men in operation. You've got a bit of shooting there, you've got a bit of Lonzo Ball, like you've got points with Brandon Ingram, bit of JJ Redick, various bits and pieces, and obviously it's a very different scenario. That's why you got traded, because the Thunder are going through a rebuilding phase at the moment. So that's beneficial for Steven Adams, because he can push to play playoffs basketball wildcard. So I want to frame this discussion around Steven Adams as with the idea to you. What are your thoughts on Steven Adams and the New Orleans Pelicans cracking into the playoffs race in the Western Conference? For those who don't know, the Western Conference is far stronger than the Eastern Conference. I'm not sure if that is like as emphatic after the whirlwind of the last few days with trades and free agency and stuff like that. But the Western Conference is far more competitive. Obviously, that's where the Lakers are. You talked about RJ Hampton. Denver Nuggets are in the Western Conference. The LA Clippers are in the Western Conference. Houston Rockets are in the Western Conference. Oklahoma City are in the Western Conference. Like, that is where the shit is in the NBA over the last few years, and probably leading into this season as well. So it's going to be very difficult for the New Orleans Pelicans to establish themselves as a playoff presence this year, and perhaps a consistent playoff presence moving forward. But I want your thoughts, Wildcard, on how this New Orleans Pelicans roster looks with Steven Adams, and just surely there must be, I'm going to predict that you're pretty excited about Steven Adams as a Pelican. just as I'm excited about Ngāti Pelicans.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you, like, on a scale from mourning the end of the Adams and Thunder reign to, like, absolutely forget about it, full steam ahead, superstar excited, just super excited for the Pelicans.
Super Steve excited,
yes, for the Pelicans tenure, which, I mean, it might only be 1 year. He's on the last year of his contract. Speaking of the first contract after your rookie one being the one where you get all the money. That's the one that Steven Adams is just finishing up, so he's earning a lot of money. This is why I didn't think when we have previously talked about this and when I've previously written about it, I erred on the side of I don't think he'll be traded now in the off season. I thought he was a very good chance to be traded by the trade deadline when half his contract, he only got half a contract left, half a year of this contract rather. That was, and then also you've got like the time before that to get him to shoot some 3-pointers and make it look like he's a more modern, available kind of center. But it turns out they didn't need to do that, because what I underestimated from all that was just the absolute shenanigans of this, like everything you said before. You have the draft, the free agency window, and then the trade window overlapping both of them, all happening like in the space of a week. Everything condensed like to the point of like antimatter. It's mental. And that just changed the landscape a lot, and it allowed for Steven Adams to be not a draft day trade, but it was a trade that was influenced by the draft because there were picks involved and whatever.
Wait. You were gonna ask me about my.
Oh yeah, well if you have if you want to
son.
chuck on the odd scale, go for it.
What set up your scale.
Well,
what are you talking?
From pure sadness and devastation at the end of his time with the Thunder to forget about the Thunder, I'm full steam ahead, full Steve ahead was Super Steve, whatever the thing I said was, for the Pelicans thing, and just like entirely excited for the future.
I'm 10 out of 10. I'm full Steve ahead with Super Steve on the Pelicans, but I can only be full steam ahead with Steven Adams on the Pelicans because of the good vibes of Steven Adams leaving the Thunder. Like, that just seems like a beautiful exit. Everyone is appreciative, full of mana, full of positive energy, gratitude. The Thunder are going to rebuild. That's cool. Steven Adams can move on. So it's only full steam ahead because of how the relationship between Steven Adams and the Thunder was and how the exit played out. There's no sadness there. It's only...
It was time.
Genuine intrigue and excitement for Steven Adams on the Pelicans.
Yeah, it was time for, like, both parties to... And even, like, it's not just... Obviously, the Thunder rebuilding, they had the keys to the car there. They were driving it where they wanted to go. Their rebuilding project is the reason he's been traded. But I also don't think it's a bad thing for him as a player. Obviously the perspective of being able to challenge for the playoffs, and we know that the Pelicans will be, like, to what you were saying, asking earlier, like, we know the Pelicans, I'm not saying they will make the playoffs. I would, at this point, lean towards them probably not. I think you would have to rely on getting 70 games out. Well, actually, I don't know how long the season's meant to be, but let's say 80% of this season having a fit Zion Williamson for that to happen. And I just don't know if that's a possibility this year or next down the line. Sure, obviously you expect him to be able to get through his injury worries eventually, or else you wouldn't have invested in him. But whether you can back him up in his second season after a very injury-plagued first, I don't know, and therefore I don't know if they're going to have quite enough gas in the tank to make the playoffs in a Western Conference where the Lakers aren't getting any worse. The Clippers have a new coach, but they're not necessarily going to be... I mean, they might be worse. They probably aren't going to be so much worse that they miss the playoffs. Denver Nuggets aren't getting any worse. Who was fourth? The Houston Rockets. Well, we don't know about the Rockets. There's a little asterisk on the Rockets because both Russell Westbrook and James Harden have asked for trades over the last few days. Don't know if those will happen just for logistical reasons, but clearly there's something up there, and they are also coming in up with I think Steve Silas is their new coach there. D'Antoni's left, so that's a factor. Like maybe the Rockets drop out. I don't know. Oklahoma City were fifth, definitely dropping out. Utah are going to have to, they shouldn't be any worse, but it's just whether other teams are better enough to overtake them. Dallas are going to be better, and Portland are going to be better. Portland were clearly better once they got to the bubble thing, and they're onto something over the second half of last season. They should be better. Memphis should be better as well. They were a young team who's only going to get stronger with more experience. Phoenix Suns undefeated in the bubble. We're up to the 10th seed as well. So like Memphis didn't make the playoffs. They should be better. Phoenix didn't make the playoffs. They will definitely be better. They've got Chris Paul. They've made some very good free agency signings. Clearly a team that's on the rise, 8-0 in the bubble. San Antonio Spurs, you never want to count them out. Greg Popovich will still be around, you know. They have a healthier season. Who knows? Sacramento Kings started really well. I don't think they'll make the playoffs, but they started last season nicely, and they've still got, you know, young players on the rise. New Orleans were all the way down wherever we are now, 13th, 14th. They don't list them all the way. With a 30-42 record. Now, they had a lot of injuries, and that's why they weren't as good as they could have been. And they should, you know, to be honest, I think Steven Adams coming in is an improvement over Derek Favors as well, and they've lost Drew Holiday, but they have at least got Eric Bledsoe, who's somewhat a replacement for him. So they shouldn't be that much worse, but they need to be a lot better in order. Like they were 5 wins out of the playoffs, but realistically that's more like 10 wins because Portland only got in on the play-in thing, and we know that other teams are going to improve. And then even then, below that, Minnesota just got stronger. They, you know, traded for Rubio, who's done well with them in the past. Most importantly, they picked up Anthony Edwards. And Golden State Warriors going to have Steph Curry back, and going to have not going to have Klay Thompson, sadly, which is a devastating one because he's one of everyone's. I was going to say one of my favorite players, but I think he's one of everyone's favorite players. But you know, Draymond Green will be back. They've got the number 2 overall pick. They're going to be Kelly Oubre traded from the Suns via the Thunder. So like the Warriors are going to be fitter and healthier again, and maybe not competing for a championship. I don't know. Maybe they will be, but they're going to be better. Like there are no bad teams in the West is the point. So I don't know that the Pelicans can make playoffs. It's a long way around of saying that, but they did just sack their coach because they expected to do better than they did. And their new coach is Stan Van Gundy, and I think that is low-key awesome for Steven Adams, because you think of the Stan Van Gundy teams that have done well in the past, like he was up and down with Detroit, never really did that well there, but I mean he did have Andre Drummond in those times, getting the best out of him back when he was still a functioning NBA player. We'll see what he's like on the Cavs this year, but he was another big center who they wanted to trade last season, I think it was, and then struggled to find a marketplace for him, which was another reason why I didn't think Adams would necessarily. But I mean, different situations with contracts, whatever. But then even before that, like the most famous Stan Van Gundy teams are those Orlando Magic teams of about sort of 10, 15 years ago, when you had like early career prime Dwight Howard. And then before that, Miami Heat, he goes his first team as a head coach. Shaquille O'Neal was there when he was there. Like he's always had a big old-fashioned center who hasn't necessarily been a shooter from range. So this is the kind of position that Van Gundy knows how to get the best out of, and he knows how to use a player like Steven Adams. He's coming into a situation as well where Derek Favors was the center before him, also a similar player, very good defensive player, strong rebounder, doesn't shoot 3-pointers, does a lot of the little things. Like it's almost a perfect mold for him to be slipping into. Plus, there isn't the same like other teams will push for like take the center off the court and play a smaller team. They could do that with the Pelicans, but Zion Williamson isn't really ready defensively to be a center. They tried that at times and it was a bit of a disaster. So generally, I think you're going to see Zion paired with someone like Steven Adams, which is it's just a lot of reasons why this seems like a really good fit. And at this stage in his career, I think it's fair to say like the last 2 seasons, we sort of thought there was the potential for Steven Adams to have like massive numbers and averaging like 18-12 or something like that, and that never even really came close to happening. Part of that's just his personality. He's not out there trying to get those numbers. And part of that is just the way the Thunder were trying to play and rebuilding the team a couple times in a couple years. And I just think the Pelicans are such a good fit for him in so many different ways, and not the least of which being the emotional fit as well, because they traded for him. Like, they wanted his contract. They want him there to be their starting center. They've gone out and shown that. They've given up a future first rounder to ensure that. Like, it works on that level. It works on the coaching level. It works on the fit on the floor level. I just think this is such nice timing for Steven Adams at this point of his career as well, where maybe he just needed a little bit of a boost, a bit of a shake-up, a bit of a change, something to, reinvigorate his career, where maybe he'd just got, not stagnant, but just he hadn't continued on the growth we saw in his first few seasons in the league. And this is maybe the best thing for him in a number of ways. And he will be on a competitive team that's trying to win, because you don't sack your coach for missing the playoffs if you didn't care about making the playoffs. And just, oh man, I'm full Steve ahead excited as well. It's just, it works on all these different levels, and I'm struggling to find reasons to be, the floor spacing is the only reason to be pessimistic, really. But at the same time, like, he's capable of shooting 3-pointers. We know he practices them. He just hasn't been unleashed in an NBA game like that. He might only have to shoot 1 or 2 a game for that to not even be a factor anymore. So lots of reasons to be very excited about this, and I'm struggling to find any kind of reasons to be, sad or disappointed or whatever about the fact that he's left the Thunder. I just think the situation is so much better now for him that it's just a big mutually beneficial improvement all around.
Beauty. Exciting times for Steven Adams. Obviously, you'll be all over that. You'll keep a close eye on Steven Adams as he starts his Pelicans career. He goes from the Thunder to the Pelicans. I don't know if there's many Pelicans in Aotearoa, but we do have the odd thunderstorm, so maybe we do have the odd Pelican here in Aotearoa. Wildcat. We will dive into a bit of wider Blackcaps cricket now. Pretty much headlined by this upcoming T20 series against the West Indies. I'm not sure where your feelings are with the conversation around the Blackcaps. There is a story. Well, there's a couple yarns in the media right now about how Tim Seifert is the second coming of Brendan McCullum. Pretty much because Brendan McCullum has recently spent a lot of time with Tim Seifert, and they are very similar players, which is cool. No dramas there. But there's another story on Cricinfo that I'm just having a gaze at now, where McCullum says T20 hasn't been the best format for New Zealand of late, and I know there is a deep desire to improve those results. I think with the T20 World Cup not being far away, now is the time to really start to drill down what your best 11 will be, and then you start to build a squad that will be competitive at the next World Cup. To me, that is relevant, because that's kind of the whole idea that I was trying to outline, I think, in last week's episode. 2 T20 World Cups. The focus, as far as major tournaments go, is in the T20 format, and all of this should be, it's not, what I think I confuse myself with is trying to have this priority discussion across the formats, and maybe say that this format is a priority over that format, which I'm happy I worked through that process, but that's not really how I want to discuss it. It's more just about, we've got a major tournament. In fact, we have 2 major tournaments for whatever fucking reason. All glory to the ICC. But we have these major tournaments coming up, and the context for Blackcaps T20 cricket right now is trying to find the best 11 players of T20 cricket from Aotearoa, and obviously you need a squad as well. So the best 13 to 16 T20 players as well. And that's where I found the T20 squad for this upcoming series against the West Indies a little bit weird. It just seems like, I think you said last episode that it's pretty much like a rinse and repeat type of job, or maybe you said that about the test squad. I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Both, I think.
Yeah,
but
it's
more
like
the 2021.
The way I'm looking at this T20 series, and basically the only way to look at Blackcaps T20 cricket is trying to figure out the best team for the World Cup. And I don't know, a lot of this we actually discussed last week, so I'm not sure what you want to add, because there's no like Colin Munro. We discussed Colin Munro's standing with New Zealand cricket as well. How are you just feeling about whatever the fuck with the Blackcaps?
I mean, like, full honesty, I'm just kind of having I wouldn't say like withdrawal symptoms, because there's been nothing to be withdrawn from. I'm just like getting really impatient to be able to watch the Blackcaps play cricket. Like, it's that's the overwhelming factor, is I'll take anything I can get at this point. So therefore, like, that I haven't thought about it too much. I don't know. When is the second 2020 World Cup, by the way? Because it was meant to be one in October and then one in mid-year, and then they moved. One was in Australia, then it was going to be in India, and then they moved the Indian one up, and then I think the other one's, I can't remember. But are they both in 2021?
Nah, there's one 2021, and then I think there's one in 2022.
Right. So it's still, yeah, okay. So it's, see, that almost makes it more complicated, because it drags out the whole 2020 experience for longer. Because one of those was supposed to be the Champions Trophy, which no longer exists anymore, because they, well, as you said, ICC, congratulations, whatever. So that almost makes it a longer game. I don't know. I was quite interested in something because I saw that, I didn't read the full thing, but I did have it open earlier, that Quick Info article you were talking about with Brendan McCullum, and I was quite intrigued by his point about us not necessarily being at the best in 20, like, this is the format that we are at our weakest, and I think that's probably something that reflects on an aspect of these 2020 squads. This one certainly, but you know, there's more, even more so in the last couple of years, of that whole factor of like using it as a sort of, I mean, it's not as simple as saying like this is the integration into international cricket, little transition, play a few of these and then we'll work you into something else. Like, for example, I think Kyle Jamieson has played ODIs and tests and still hasn't played 2020s, and they're definitely doing it with Devon Conway, as this is his avenue into international cricket. They've done it with bowlers like, you know, Blair Tickner, and Scott Kugelheim is another one, and etc. That probably adds into the not quite taking T20 stuff as seriously in the part, which is just why all, like, as a whole, I haven't been able to get too fizzed about like the intricacies of this 2020 series. I'm mostly just waiting to watch actual cricket, but yeah, I don't know where else to go with that.
Well, Kat. The best place to go, and I'm glad we talked our way into where we're going, because maybe the results, right? So last year, the Blackcaps lost their T20 series 5-0 to India.
Certainly
they lost a T20 series to England 3-2. Then before that, there was the New Zealand in Sri Lanka, which New Zealand won. There was a T20 series, another series against India, and Sri Lanka was there that summer. New Zealand won both of those T20 series. So basically, what's happened over the last two summers, 2018-19, New Zealand defeated both Sri Lanka and India. Last summer, 2019-20, New Zealand lost to England and India. If we go back a little bit further, Pakistan won a series in New Zealand. New Zealand beat the West Indies. and India that was in India. So basically the last 2 summers are the most important there, and it's split between the 2 summers. The first summer, New Zealand win both of their T20 series in Aotearoa. The next summer, New Zealand lose both of their T20 series in Aotearoa. So that's a bit weird. If you just look at just strictly recent results, not just, I won't blabble on with the context and when they were, I'll just list them. So starting back in the summer of 2016-17, New Zealand won a series against Bangladesh. They lost the series against South Africa. They went to India and lost the series. They won a home series against the West Indies. They lost a home series against Pakistan. They lost the series to Pakistan. That's a bit weird. Then they defeated Sri Lanka. Then they defeated India. Then they defeated Sri Lanka. Then they lost to England. Then they lost to India. So it's a bit all over the show. It's kind of... I'm not doing the math. I'm just kind of looking at it. I'll say it's 60-40 losses to wins in a weird percentage, whatever the fuck, I don't know. But it's not quite 50-50, as good as 50-50, but and then it's also weighted to more recent results, the loss to England and India. So I'm not sure if that's interesting to you, Wildcard, because it's kind of like compared to Test cricket. Yes, Brendan McCullum is correct in saying that New Zealand hasn't been so good at T20 cricket, but in the just like the context of strictly in T20 cricket, given a slightly more volatile level of results and series to series, a lot of stuff can change. Game to game, things can change as well in T20 cricket. I personally am not confident in saying that New Zealand has been below average in T20 cricket. I think they've been kind of par for the course. The Doosra...
Par from their own expectations or par compared to everyone else?
I think it's all the same. Like, I don't think anyone...
Okay.
Like, no one's looking at the New Zealand T20 team and thinking like, oh my god, this team is the best T20 team in the world and they're going to win every game. But then again, no one's looking at the Blackcaps T20 team and being like, these guys are shit. Right? It's kind of like the results match what you're alluding to there with the expectations. Because the expectations are like pretty much 50-50. New Zealand's just a good team. Some series they'll win, some series they'll lose. All good. And so it just seems like everything is in alignment there. Yet I keep coming back to the series lost to England, the series lost to India. And those came in the same summer, and they were the most recent summer. So I'm not sure how you view all of that, Wildcard.
Well, I do have a theory. I do have a theory about this.
Give me your theory, but like also just a quick like gut check. When I say Blackcaps T20 team, do you like instantly feel confident in the Blackcaps T20 team based on recent years? Do you just feel like a sense of dread because they suck? Like what just immediately comes to your loins when thinking about the Blackcaps T20 international team?
Yeah, my loins. My loins are saying that it's not a feeling like they're bad and therefore I expect them to lose. It's not a feeling like they're very good and therefore I expect them to win. I would come down on the side of saying I think they've been disappointing based on their own expectations, and I think compared to other countries we are not one of the 4 best teams, which we are in the other 2 formats. Probably Test match is a little bit up for grabs, but certainly in the ODIs we're one of the 4 best teams on the planet. And I think a Test match team would be competitive in most conditions, at least. 2020s we're not. We're outside looking in, and I don't think we should be. Like, if you're that good at the other stuff, you should be more competitive in 2020s. And I think maybe the success they've had in the other 2 formats is this is my theory, is kind of the reason why the feeling that I have in my loins about the Blackcaps T20 team is one of, what would you call missed opportunities, but before the opportunities come along. Like it's not that they've missed the opportunities so much as that I expect them to later miss opportunity. Like just underwhelming, I guess. Underwhelming will do. That's the feeling I have about them, and the reason for that is because I think you look at the test match stuff takes care of itself. Like generally in a test match, the best team wins. You don't get a lot of upsets where it's like, and when you do, it's something absolutely special when someone scores like a double hundred that changes the course of a game or whatever. Like normally, like it's a test match for a reason. 5 days, absolutely grueling. You make mistakes, you get punished. The team that makes fewer mistakes, the team that comes up with more like consistency, therefore, is that's how those test matches are decided. Generally speaking, when it comes to the ODI stuff, I think New Zealand has a very similar kind of mentality, which we saw them do very well with at the World Cup, and they weren't so good in the group stages. Remember, like they were losing games, they were sort of doing what they do, which is like, we'll take care of our stuff. We're just going to bowl good line and lengths, nothing funky. Like we're not going to be coming at you with an array of bouncers or in-swinging Yorkers or whatever. We're not going to be giving you like they only pick the one spinner in those games generally, and I think Ish Sodhi played one game as a rotated team. Tim Southey wasn't playing those games. Like it was a very clear plan, and they weren't out there trying to score 350 runs in an innings either. They were being like, we're going to bowl a certain way, and we're going to restrict you. We're going to play scoreboard pressure. We're going to trust that we make fewer mistakes. We're going to execute in the field. We're going to hit our line and lengths, and we're going to say, like, if you bat well, you'll probably score a 50 against us. We're not necessarily going to be, like, ripping you out, ripping up your top order. But if you make a mistake, we will get you out. Like, it's a little bit reliant on other teams' mistakes, and it worked perfectly against India in the semi-final, which, when you think about it, they didn't have that much form or momentum going into that game, but the Black Caps managed to turn it into their kind of thing just by not, like, in a funny way, they managed to mold the game into the type of game they wanted to play by not trying to mold the game into a different, like, rather than anything else, they were just sort of, it's the overall tactical version of line and length bowling. It's just like they did their job. They trusted that other things would take care of themselves if they did as well as they could do to a plan, and they did, and it worked perfectly against India, and they won that game. It almost worked against England, and they didn't lose that game, but they also didn't win the World Cup. So, and both were relatively low-scoring games. I think both under 250 through the first innings there. Like that type of cricket wins you test matches, and the Black Caps have found out a way to win ODI games as well, especially like the bigger the context, the bigger the pressure of the situation, the more it works, because, India, you can imagine the amount of pressure that was on India in that World Cup semi-final to win. Black Caps just turn that in and on itself and then use it against them. It's a clever little tactic, really. In 2020s, that doesn't work, though. Like, in 2020s, that just comes across as the Black Caps look passive and a little short on ideas, because what you need in 2020s isn't a perfect 11 group of 11 players who all do 1/11th of a job. What you need is, like, a top order where you can afford 4 guys out of 5 to fail if the 5th one scores 80 of 40 deliveries, You just need big game breakers, and you need wicket takers rather than necessarily trying to restrict run rates, because batsmen are too clever. You don't have the same amount of pressure on losing wickets because there's only 20 overs. They will find ways to score runs off that type of bowling. You think of guys like Colin de Gronholm, like how well did he bowl in those 2 knockout games in the World Cup? He's unbowlable at 2020 level. Like they literally don't bowl him because that type of stuff just gets pummeled out of the park. And so that's, that coming around, like that's the theory I'm working towards with the Black Caps 2020 side, is that I think they're trying to do the same stuff that they do in the other formats. A few different aspects of like personnel changes, players who don't play, players who do play 2020s and, not other formats, etc. Like there are little aspects like that, but I think if you had someone it's going to be interesting how McCullum goes in commentary, because I think he has a bit of a knack for saying things that sound really profound, but turn out to just, when you think about them, are actually like, yeah, that's kind of obvious now that I think about it. Like what he says about the Blackcaps not producing at 2020 level, it seems about right. Like, it sounds dramatic at first, and then you think about it, like you roll through the results you did earlier. It's like, yeah, well, I guess they haven't. And one thing that I zoned out for 2020 international cricket for long enough that I've forgotten about all this stuff at the start of this conversation. But as you went through the results, I'm like recalling, yeah, there were a lot of, like, we got swept against India, but there were a lot of close games. There were a couple super overs. I think there was definitely a super over against England, and it's those kind of aspects. And ultimately, I guess you could say that this is probably why they didn't win the super over at the World Cup as well. It's like the Blackcaps have this kind of mentality of the do your job mentality kind of thing. It puts them in a situation, they rely on other teams' mistakes, but then when you put in this little condensed situation like a 2020 game or like a super over, which is a 2020 to the extreme, you don't need do your job mentality cricket. You need game breaking, go and win the game kind of cricket. And that's the stuff that they don't have. And that's the kind of stuff which I just wish they would lean into more in the 2020 arena. Like, I just wish they would be a bit more. Maybe you had this for a little while when they just like Colin Munro's in there with a free reign to do what he wants, but Colin Munro's situation in the 2020 team, as we discussed last week, is a little bit weird at the moment. And I don't know that Devon Conway, I suppose, will be the next opener. He's certainly not of that 2020 specialist mold. I don't know they have a lot of that in the team. And it's frustrating because I remember when, it would have been Sri Lanka, right? When Sri Lanka were here before the World Cup and we played 2020s and I'm pretty sure, there might have been the ODI series actually. I can't remember which, but they came to this thing of like Jimmy Neesham as the closer, batting at the end of innings, and he smacked a couple quick 50s in that series and did really well. And then I think he must have held his space. He did hold his space through the World Cup and stuff, but then suddenly wasn't being picked in that, or only played a couple games in those home 2020s last summer. It's like, well, here's an example of a player who can give you the X factor late on in innings in particular that they don't have at the moment, and they're not really pursuing those kind of ideas, which you know that someone like Brendan McCullum is thinking about, and the kind of things he would be going for is how do we get outside the box, find creative solutions to this. And yeah, I just, the theory in conclusion, therefore, this is the end of my essay, is the way that the style that they play that is as successful as it has been in ODI cricket, in Test cricket, is also the reason why I don't think they're a very good 2020 team. Like, I think it's the same reason that they're good at one is why they're bad at another.
Boom. I like it. I've got a lot to add, but that is an interesting hypothesis leading into this T20 series. And that's something for the listeners to keep an eye on, that maybe, as you said, some elements that make them great in other formats don't quite make them so great in T20 cricket, and that's in front of the backdrop of maybe being a little less good at T20 cricket than we think. You did mention Jimmy Neesham there. He averages 16.81 with a strike rate of 141 in T20 international cricket. In T20 cricket, that average goes up to 25.69, and there's a slight dip in the strike rate. So with the ball, his record is pretty much the same. So that's just an interesting note there. I pulled up some stats on Cricinfo, and this isn't a perfect exercise because like the batting rankings that I've got here are based on averages, so keep in mind T20 cricket isn't exactly, average isn't the first thing you look at T20 cricket, but it can still be used to sort through players, and this has a minimum innings of 20, so it doesn't have like every single T20 batsman, unlike the bowling rankings that I've got here, which is best bowling averages, but there's no minimum. So obviously this is fraught with little bits of funk that we just have to sort through, but hopefully we can lay it out in a in a way that not only makes sense but is actually applicable. Of the current players, Williamson, this is in order, Williamson, Guptill, Munro, Taylor, Anderson, then Seifert, then de Grandhomme and Mitchell Santner. So the key thing there is Colin Munro is the third best T20 international batsman of the last 4 years. With the ball, Adam Milne is the fourth ranked bowler from the last 4 years. So with the ball, it goes, there's a couple, like, this is full of a who's who of random Blackcaps Jerrys, like some of these names wildcard. Aaron Redmond, Nathan Astle, Andy Mackay, Grant Elliott, Chetan Patel, Ewan Thompson, George Worker, Ian O'Brien, Scott Styris, Daniel Vittori, James Franklin, Ian Butler. Daryl Mitchell and Lockie Ferguson are the only two current players who have who are among that group. But again, there is a small sample size factor for a lot of these bowlers, like Aaron Redmond only had 2.5 overs, whatever. Point being that Adam Milne is fourth in current Blackcaps from the last 4 years. So the first thing that I can take away from that is that Colin Munro and Adam Milne are among the best Blackcaps T20 players of the last 4 years, and they're both playing Big Bash. They're not going to be playing in this Blackcaps T20 series versus the West Indies. So again, we've talked a lot about that landscape of T20 cricket, the impact of Big Bash, how the contracts work and all that stuff. I would add to that now by saying that if you are building your best T20 team, Colin Munro should definitely be there and Adam Milne should at least be in a squad. Obviously he's got to prove his fitness, but I think that's quite interesting. Lockie Ferguson and Daryl Mitchell are the only current Blackcaps T20 bowlers who are averaging below 20. Now, there's a lot of decent bowlers averaging in the mid-20s, but I was surprised because of the gap between the best bowlers in the current Blackcaps setup. Daryl Mitchell averages 17.8. He's played 11 games, so he's got a decent sample size. Lockie Ferguson has an average of 15.8, and he's played 8 games, so an okay sample size. Next best, Mitchell Santner, average 21. Then you get to Milne, and then there's a lot of players in that group of mid-20s. Hamish Bennett, who was an automatic selection in this Blackcaps T20 squad, he's got an average of 30. Both of us are a bit skeptical about the presence of Hamish Bennett in these T20 squads. Highly unlikely to play at the World Cup T20. And to your point about Colin de Grandhomme, he's got an average of 40. And then a couple of the fringe seamers like Scott Kugelheim and Blair Tickner are also averaging into their 40s. So that tells us that right now, Adam Milne should be selected ahead of Scott Kugelheim and Blair Tickner. Obviously, Adam Milne, he's always injured, he's got to play games, but if you're selecting a World Cup and everyone's good and proper, a World Cup squad, there's a case for Adam Milne ahead of a couple of these other players. Last thing here, wildcard. Corey Anderson is ranked 6th overall for Blackcaps T20 batsmen. He is 5th in the current group. Corey Anderson last played a T20 game for Aotearoa in 2018. So it's a weird old thing where like some of the best players are no longer factors. Like Corey Anderson, like literally crawled his way through the last CPL, Caribbean Premier League. I think he got dropped at some point, to just be honest. And I wrote about Corey Anderson earlier in this year. He's been out in the wilderness. He's like not even a factor really. But if you're looking for a wild card, if Corey Anderson can come in and find a bit of cricket to play at the very least and then perform strongly, he could be an interesting factor. But it is weird that Corey Anderson is among the best T20 batsmen Aotearoa has ever produced, but he's not a factor in the Blackcaps T20 team at the moment. And then you've got Colin Munro and Adam Milne, who are among the best T20 players from Aotearoa at the moment, and neither of them are in the squad as well. If you want to make a case for Seth Rance, he's got a better record than Tim Southee, he's got a better record than Matt Henry, he's got a better record than Hamish Bennett. So if you're selecting Bennett, maybe have a gaze at Rance. These are just like things that Doug Bracewell, he can bat, he can bowl. He has the 5th best bowling record of the current group. So these are things that I think are important to highlight, because there's this idea of maybe this is like packaged alongside your idea of the difference in formats and the same game plan or similar game plan style of play not working across the formats. I had to lay all that out because another player who comes to mind, who I talked extensively about last episode, was Hamish Rutherford. But it's all under the idea of like, we just kind of think that in New Zealand all our cricketers are clumped together, and when Tim Southee or Kane Williamson or Trent Boult or whoever else, when they can't play T20 cricket, someone else steps in and gets their opportunity. That's how things are generally rotated in the Blackcaps system, or it's a good way to ease a young player into international cricket. With T20 World Cups coming up, there has to be an opening of the minds as to who the best T20 players are in Aotearoa. And that involves looking at the international competitions. That involves factoring in Glenn Phillips and what he does in the CPL, what Hamish Rutherford has done in England, what Colin Munro and Adam Milne are going to do in the Big Bash League. Like, if you're selecting the best T20 players from Aotearoa, you have to. If your objective is to win the T20 World Cup, you have to, I think the T20 format is the kind of format where you have to open up your player base. You've got to look around the world and find a bit of X factor, or just someone who has played in those conditions before, whatever it is. Whereas at the moment, I think we share the same vibe of the Blackcaps just chuck the same players in to the T20 team and maybe expect to win games just because, as you said, they've figured out how to play cricket.
Yeah, which is all. I mean, it is the same thing that we both just talked about. Really, it's the overarching theme is the same. And to take it a step further, and you mentioned opening the player base, you also mentioned opening your minds. I think the opening of the minds is the most important one, because it's you need to not be selecting players based on other formats. You need to be taking 20 as seriously as you possibly can, which means therefore looking at it as a unique beast, which it is. And in order to do that's what you have to do in order to be as competitive as you possibly can be by the time of the 2020 World Cup. Maybe you don't care enough about the 2020 World Cup to do that, and you're like, well, we'll just take our chances with what we got. But thinking down those lines, you therefore have to ask questions that involve names like, for example, is Trent Boult in the first 11 of a 20? We know he's the first bowler on the team sheet when it comes to picking a test match team. He's probably the second name on the test match thing after the captain. He's certainly going to be starting every ODI game if he's fit and ready as well. Is he in the best 11 for 2020 when you're only bowling 4 overs, batsmen are coming at you from ball 1? And maybe he is, but it is a question you have to ask. Is Tim Southee in the best 11? Is he one of your top 5 bowlers who could trust to bowl. And you know what this comes down to as well is like it's an aspect of cricket that they have not, for all the control they've found over other aspects of their one-day international cricket, one that I'm not sure they've had as much success with as they should. A little bit better at the World Cup just because they managed to take it out of the equation by creating these really like low-scoring, intense games in the 2 that mattered. But their death bowling has been shocking for a long time. And how did they lose the World Cup final trophy? Not losing the final, but lost the tiebreaker at the end of the final after drawing the final. Important technicalities there. But how did they lose it was in a like super over where you've got one dude bowling 1 over trying to not be smashed for however many runs like possible. And what did it end up being? Like 17 or 18 or something like that. And we almost got there with the bat in the Guptill and Neesham, but didn't quite. But like Trent Boult since then has said like he'd never bowled a super over in his life before. I don't think he would. They picked the best bowler, and it's the same mentality, isn't it? Like, and this isn't necessarily like it's not a full on criticism because this line of thinking got them to 90%, like gets them 90% of their success, 10% of failure. So like overwhelmingly it's working. But in that ultimate moment, like they chucked a guy in to do something that had to be over the top rather than just like the do your job mentality type thing. Instead of that, Trent Boult had to go in and do something extraordinary and wasn't able to do it because he wasn't prepared to be able to do it. I don't even think he would be the dude necessarily you're aiming to bowl the 50th over of games. I mean, I think Jimmy Neesham did it a couple times really nicely during that World Cup, which he's not a bowler you would pick anywhere near in the same category as Trent Boult. Having said that, maybe his individual skill set with a lot of nice little slow balls and variations is better for that 150th over type or super over type situation. And they've lost super overs since as well. Tim Southey lost one. I think Tim Southey's lost a couple in his career, actually. It's like Tim Southey's a really good bowler. And he's had good success in 2020s before. But in that one situation, which can be the winning of a World Cup, they weren't prepared because it was that opposite mentality of going above and beyond rather than being like slow and steady or whatever. And those are like the types of bowlers who can bowl in those situations are actually the ones you want in 2020s because of the whole thing. And maybe you'd pick Trent Boult, you bowl him out at the start where you got restrictions in place and he can be a bit more tactical. I don't know, like I'm not saying drop Trent Boult from the 2020 team. I'm just saying he doesn't play a lot of them anyway because Boult and Williamson, more than anyone else, seem to often take rests during this part of the summer. But like considerations like that is, it doesn't matter how good they are at the other formats. This is like a specific role, and are you picking the best players, the best bowlers, the best batsmen for these situations? And maybe they've gotten better with like Conway and Phillips. It's pretty hard to like Devon Conway, top run scorer in the 2020 stuff last summer. You can say, well, why isn't he in the test team as well? Will he make the ODI team? Blah, blah, blah. He topped in all those formats as well. But those things don't matter. What we're just looking at specifically is like put your blinkers on, only focus on 2020. He was the top 2020 run scorer last summer in the domestic stuff. He's earned a call up. And you'll get a chance to play in lieu of Colin Munro, presumably. Glenn Phillips, excellent for Auckland for a few years, even more excellent at the Caribbean Premier League. Caribbean teams coming over here to play. He gets picked. Hopefully he'll get to play a few games batting at 3 or whatever. Like, cool. Like, that's how you do it. Those are picking players who might also, probably not a coincidence just because of their overall ability, are also really good at the other formats, but they're also good enough to be picked on merit in this format alone. I suppose you could link this idea of selection into the whole like picking spin bowlers based on how well they bat as well, which has been a prevalent thing, as opposed to just picking them specifically over whether they can take you wickets with spin bowling in Test match cricket, which has not always been the case. But just having that specialist thinking about 2020 cricket is how they're going to get better, and it's sort of I haven't even read any more context behind the comments that McCullum made. But I would imagine, knowing McCullum's mentality as we do, that's kind of what he's thinking about as well. You can't treat this format of the game as a throwaway and then expect to have success in it, right?
Correct. And I know this wasn't your point, because it's just about the thinking and the idea behind it. Williamson, Southey, I got to say for myself, Williamson, Southey and Bolt, based on their work in T20 cricket, they are first 11 T20 players. But that, to me, that makes the point of planning and preparation, which has always, well, not always, but since we've started writing about Blackcaps cricket, planning and preparation has been non-existent ahead of major tournaments. So part of the idea is just the simple thought of picking your best T20 players and not so much your best cricketers. Also, a huge part of that is planning and preparation for a major tournament, and that goes back to what you said about Trent Bolt bowling a super over. Well, there's no planning or preparation there, and what's the result? Wildcard, we need to do our seam bowler draft.
Yeah, how good's this going to be?
This is going to be good. I will let you have the pick. We are going to select the first pick. Sorry, we're going to select 5, or do you want to do 6? Because
let's go. Let's do 5 and then like a bolter or something like that. We'll pick like a bonus pick who's just maybe a funkier aspect, but we'll pick a top 5 and have a reserve or something like that, you know.
All right, number 1. Who are you selecting with the number 1 New Zealand seam bowling draft pick?
Yeah, with the first overall pick in the, whatever we're calling this, niche cast seam bowling Kiwi cricketing stock stable draft. It's not my best Adam Silver impersonation, but it'll have to do. With the first overall pick, I am going to pick a guy we were just talking about, Trent Bolt.
Trent Bolt.
They don't come better.
They do not come better.
No explanation needed.
And just for anyone thinking about Trent Bolt, he was absolutely bonkers amazing in the IPL. And that's for Trent Bolt and Kane Williamson, that is the mark of their quality across the board, is that they are truly world class in any format. You've gone Bolts. I am partial to Neil Wagner swinging the ball, and I do think Neil Wagner swinging the ball is an underrated aspect of Neil Wagner's bowling. Everyone views him as the king of the bouncers, but he can move the ball, he can pitch the ball up. It would be rude of me, though, to ignore Tim Southey with my first pick.
Yeah, there you go. I would have taken Tim Southey next as well, as it's for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. I know his ODI stuff has slumped a little bit, and he's probably not in the first 11. He's in every squad, but not in the first 11. But like Test match cricket, Tim Southey's record over the last 3 or 4 years is only like I can't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's only a shade worse than Neil Wagner's and is better than Trent Bolt's. Like, he's been excellent in Test cricket for a couple years, and I'm not sure he gets the credit for that. I don't know why. He just seems to be one of those lightning rod players, eh?
For sure, and just thinking about this, we kind of overlook like what, we've talked a lot about NBA basketball. In the off season, NBA players and any high performance athlete, they add something to their game, and it's something we overlook with Trent Bolt, Tim Southey, lesser extent Neil Wagner. But every summer they come back with like a new thing, whether it's their little scrambled seam or being, the 3/4 seam, whatever it's called. They always add something to their bowling, and that obviously ties in with them being good performers in T20, in 2020, as well. Who are you selecting with your second pick, wildcard?
Well, I mean, it's got to be Neil Wagner, right? As next man up, and one thing I'll say about like what we're talking about in terms of the 2020 specialists, for example, and picking the best players for the format and all that, like we know how good Neil Wagner is at Test match cricket, and I know this is a point that's been made many, many times, by myself included many, many times, but like it's also a point that can probably never be made often enough, that Neil Wagner's never played another format of international cricket. And, like, the thing we were saying before, like, and I'm, like, glad you sort of back that stat up as well. Like, Williamson, Bolt, Southey, etc., statistically, are in the 2020 team on merit. We do, though, have to, like, that's cool, but, like, it's the mentality of why they're being picked. Are they being picked because they're good dudes in all the other squads and they're, you know, part of the scene and do so well at tests and ODIs that they've got to be in the 2020 team? Or are they being picked in isolation because of their excellence at 2020? Because they can be picked on those merits alone, but you have to be doing it with that mentality, or else that mentality is going to let you down everywhere else in the squad. And I think this is an example of that, where, like, are we sure Neil Wagner wouldn't be an amazing 2020 international bowler? Because I'm not sure that he... I'm not just saying about could he come in and do a Hamish Bennett, like, do a little, like, I don't know, hold the fort for a little while, just have a couple games as a nice little veteran I'm saying, like, could Neil Wagner come in and be our best 2020 bowler? I'm not sure that... Like, I'm not too sure that that's out of the question. Therefore, I feel that that is another aspect of that opening of the mind. Like, that's maybe the ship has sailed, but, like, the fact Neil Wagner has never played other international formats is still completely and utterly bonkers, because he's done so well, and he wasn't even the type of player that he's become in test matches. Again, like, growing and evolving over the course. When he came in first, you remember he's the dude who took, like, 4 wickets and 5 balls that time, or was it 5 wickets and an over or something, and he was this tear-away quick South African dude. He's not that fast anymore. I don't know if he was ever that fast, or if that was just overrated because he's so aggressive, but he has become a different bowler to the one that he was talked about back when he was in his Devon Conway days of waiting for when he's going to be eligible and then go straight in the Blackcaps, because Neil Wagner was Devon Conway before Devon Conway. But he's changed as a bowler, evolved and become better in many ways since then. I don't know, I just think he's a guy who should have played a lot more in all formats rather than just being pigeonholed as a test player. And maybe he still will.
T20 bowling average of 27.82. He averages below 30 in every single format that he's played. So he's pretty good at bowling seam. You have gone with Trent Boult and Neil Wagner. I have selected Tim Southey, and with my second pick, I've got to go with Mr. Jamieson.
Ooh, this is where it gets interesting.
Right, I've gone with Jamieson. Talk about him extensively. Moves the ball, good, obviously, physical stature and all that stuff. Love his skill and what he can do. Wildcard, who is your third pick in the seam bowling draft?
Yeah, I got to think about this one just a little bit. Like, this is the point at which it becomes a little more subjective. When the top three sort of took care of themselves.
It's getting funky.
So I'm going to go with Lockie Ferguson. I think he's an all-format player. He's the quickest fella in the country. Like you were saying about Jamieson, but also Southey and all. Like, deceptively, he's not just a fast bowler. You know, he's got a deceptive little skill set as well. He's not the tallest, so he doesn't, like, he's not old, like 1980s West Indian quick with heaps of bounce. You know, he'll skid on just a little bit more, and he's a guy who he hasn't had a lot of opportunities at test matches. I think he just played the one and got injured, didn't he? And yeah, I don't think he's played since that Australian one. But anyway, he's in the limited over. He will get more chances at test match cricket for sure. And in the limited overs format, just like straight up and down, our best ODI bowler of the last 2 or 3 years, and pretty handy in the old 2020s as well.
There's very few left armers doing the rounds in Aotearoa at the moment, so that's a bit of a weird one, and just trying to build an attack.
Yeah, I got them both. I got the 2 premier lefties.
Yeah, you stole them. I think it would be rude. Is that the right mentality? I don't know, but I'm going to select Matt Henry.
Ooh. Not who I'd have gone for.
Woo! That's your problem. I've got Matt Henry. He's fit. He's healthy. He's steaming in. He's delivering a heavy ball. He's nipping the ball back into right-handers. He's nipping it away from right-handers. He is loving life. He's never been playing better, and he's in my team. Who are you selecting with your third pick?
He's also got a broken thumb.
Well, that's why I said he's fit and healthy. Like, it's an imaginary world.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, since you picked Matt Henry and I wasn't going to pick him anyway, then I get to pick the guy I would have picked anyway. And it's maybe a little bit of a surprise because we're not going with a frontline seamer here, but I think we're going with someone who, particularly in the longer formats, not a bowler at all in 2020s, pretty good in ODIs, but generally excellent, although slipping a little bit from his, never quite lived up to the heights of his debut. But I think Colin de Grandhomme in any bowling lineup as your fourth seamer is going to do pretty well in a test match scenario. So I'm going to go with CDG. Maybe a little bit of not an undercover one, maybe a little bit of a bolter, but I rate what he does with the red ball.
Rightio, you've gone CDG. I'm going Senor Douglas Bracewell with my fourth pick. Bracewell has to be in there somewhere for me. Just the style of bowling, the accuracy, the quintessential outswing, and just between Henry and Bracewell, I don't think the ceiling as high as some of your bowlers, but I know they're going to do a job for me. And I know they're going to move the ball. And I know they're going to try hard. So you've got... Who is your fifth pick?
Yeah, this is where we're probably dipping below the Blackcaps stocks at this point. Might have to take an uncapped player. I'm just looking at my list and seeing who's available. Not going with that fella, so I might... tell you what, I might have to go with Jacob Duffy. On the old up-and-comer and little bit of a bolter status, but yeah, the Duff man.
Duffy, right now, November 24th, I'm feeling pretty good about this based on what I've seen over the last few weeks. I'm going Daryl Mitchell. Just to attack the stumps. Just to peg things back a bit, attack the stumps. He's got a knack of taking wickets. If you've gone CDG, I've gone Daryl Mitchell. And that's going to round out our top 5 picks. So you've gone Trent Boult, Neil Wagner, Lockie Ferguson, Colin de Grandhomme, and Jacob Duffy. I've gone Tim Southey, Kyle Jamieson, Matt Henry, Doug Bracewell, Daryl Mitchell. We're going to chuck in one last pick. This player doesn't necessarily have to be in your... Because what we've ended up there with is 5 different bowling options, which is the basic outline of a bowling attack as far as seam bowling goes. So let's go with one more pick as a squad member, carrying the drinks.
Which, as we know, is a great experience for an up-and-coming player to be in and around that kind of environment, to be as close to the conversations as you're standing there with your Gatorades. While Tim Southey and Trent Boult talk about what they're gonna, where they're gonna attack in the next session to play and whatever. And I choose, therefore, to treat this as something of a development spot, and I am gonna go with Fraser Sheet.
Fraser Sheet? That's not what I was expecting.
Well, he's done a lot better than the guy pre-season I would have picked, which would have been Ben Sears, but... how old's Fraser Sheet? 22 or something like that? I think he's one of the young fellas, isn't he? And he's been very much a part of the Canterbury seam bowling crew, which is partly the inspiration for this. And I don't have his stats on the thing, but I can look them up on the other tab. But he's just 18 wickets at an average of 13.17, with a couple 5-wicket bags for a 22-year-old. Only played 3 games as well, so is one short on some of the others. I think someone like that, you're looking a couple more years of that kind of production, and we're talking Blackcaps cricket.
Rightio. I could not select this player in my top 5 for fairly obvious reasons when it is Adam Milne. I can't select him in the top 5 because he's going to be injured, but if we do need someone to come in, not quite in your development role, but just someone extra, I've gone with Adam Milne. Just more of a known quantity than Ben Sears, who is another, as you alluded to, someone who could be in that development pick. There's someone like Scott Kugelheim, Hamish Bennett, Adam Milne. He's getting the nod because I talked about him today.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's interesting that neither of us went with, like, Bennett or Kugelheim, for example, who are both going to be, at least, well, Kugelheim only partially, but both will be in the 2020 series against the West Indies coming up. And there's a few of the guys in the New Zealand A team that we maybe skipped ahead of, although, as you said earlier, like, the fact that there's no Cantab seamers in that New Zealand A team is mental in the first place, given that they've been like the form guys of the competition, especially bowling as a unit there. And also, like, that New Zealand A game was in Queenstown, wasn't it? So it's not even that. And it's a lot harder for Sean Solier, for example, to fly over from fly down from Auckland than it is for someone from Canterbury. But I don't know, a little bit weird. Also weird that in that New Zealand A game, Sean Solier, who's been opening for Auckland bats down the order, and Will Young, who hasn't been opening for Central Districts, is opening in this series. And a little bit confusing, but whatever.
Notable players left on the board: Hamish Bennett, Scott Kugelheim, Michael Ray, Ben Sears, Nathan Smith, Blair Tickner, Sean Solier, Mitchell McLennigan, Ed Nuttall, Seth Rance, Ollie Newton, and Will Williams, which more than anything just shows the depth of Kiwi cricket seam bowling. And those are our selections. So if you listen to this, it'll be fun to hear your selections, and maybe next week we'll do a batsman draft as well, wildcard, and we'll suss that out.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not like 3,000% confident in selecting Adam Milne, but I do like how my attack is very much seam up. Adam Milne's going to roll in seam up. Daryl Mitchell's going to wobble the seam. Matt Henry and Doug Bracewell, they're, a lot more similar to Tim Southey than they are Hamish Bennett. And I like a bit of that. So no lefties, but I got some good skill set. Maybe that's what I'm after. I'm just after the skill set and not necessarily after the hustle and bustle.
Yeah, not a massive amount of lefties actually on the table at all, eh? It's a funky one. We won't get into this now because this podcast has been going on for ages, but this is a thing I've been thinking about a lot recently because you've got old Tua Tagovailoa playing for the Miami Dolphins at the moment, or he might have been. No, I think he's it's a confusing one because he got dropped mid-game last game, but he's still their starting quarterback. But he's a left-hander, and there hasn't been a left-hander to start an NFL game for about 3 years before that, and it's something I wrote about a little bit in the NFL picks. It's a topic for another day, but because there are reasons why left-handed quarterbacks are so completely out of fashion. But interesting that there maybe isn't as many as you would think there might be in cricket, or maybe it's just, I don't know, something about the Kiwi conditions. It's not as much of an advantage when right-handers can also there are a lot of right-handers, but right-handed seam bowlers in New Zealand cricket at the moment who can swing the ball both ways, and maybe that supersedes the different angles of being left-handed. I don't know, but there's a few out there, but it's a curious one.
Plenty of lefty batsmen: Devon Conway, Henry Nichols, Tom Latham.
Yeah, exactly. No shortage
Rachin
of batsmen.
Ravindra, he's a lefty. Jeet Raval. Shout out Jeet Raval. We'll finish there, wildcard. Another episode of the Niche Cast. Big it up to yourself. Thank you for listening. And we'll be back next week with a Kiwi batsman draft. Cha-cha!